Notting Hill Carnival, 2019. It's been years since I've been to Carnival, not since before I moved out of Ladbroke Grove around 15 years ago. Before, I used to live here, Whitstable House. It was my home for the first 9 years of my life. It also happens to be just across the way from the now infamous Grenfell Tower block, the location of one of the worst residential disasters in modern British history. But this film isn't about Grenfell. Not really. That's a story that should be told by the people who used to live there. This is the story of my former family home, my childhood, and the area I grew up in, as best I remember it. Like Grenfell Tower, Whitstable House is part of a social housing block in the Ladbroke Grove area of London's Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, an area that is historically home to generations of immigrant families and the poorest part of one of the richest boroughs in the United Kingdom. Here, my mum tells the story of first moving in during the 1980s.
I fell in love with it straight away. I just thought, this is the most brilliant place I have ever seen in my life. It had huge windows, it had a balcony, and I couldn't believe how wonderful it was.
What could you see out the window from the sitting room and that's all?
From the sitting room we could see Dixon House. And window from the kitchen had this fantastic view. Grenfell Tower was the first obvious thing. And the trains. Latimer Road tube station, the trains coming up to it. You also had behind Whitstable House, you had the Westway.
Well, do you remember the gardens?
Yeah, I remember the gardens, particularly for fireworks. Bonfire nights were great. I mean, you know, the fireworks were really good. It was really loud because it was, you know, next to the Westway, so of course all the fireworks would just echo. Let's go back to the gardens where the fireworks were. And you had under the Westway Maxilla Nursery, which is where you went from the age of 18 months till 4 years old.
Tell me what you remember about the Maxilla.
The Maxilla, it was a lovely place. It was a real community amenity that had been set up originally by the Maxilla Social Club, of which the two who ran it actually lived in Whitstable House as well.
Favourite story, thing that you were involved with at the Maxilla?
Oh, being Father Christmas. Being Father Christmas. They asked me to be Father Christmas, but I was really worried that you'd play it, you'd come, because you didn't know I was doing this, and thought, there's no way he's not going to recognise me. So don't say, you know. But you didn't. You really didn't. You just basically it's the suit and the beard, and you know, sort of you came up and I said, "Have you been a good boy?" You know.
Sadly, I have no memory of this. In fact, I actually don't have many memories of the Maxilla at all. Just fragments and images, kind of like these photos. It's nice to hear my dad speaking so enthusiastically about one of his favourite memories from this time. At the age of 4, I had to leave the Maxilla to start at St Francis of Assisi Primary School just around the corner. At the same time, both of my parents were in full-time work.
I was working till late, and your mother was, of course, working late as well, so we had to have an after-school club for you.
My parents sent me to a number of after-school clubs and summer schools. The one I remember most fondly is the Venture Centre. My favourite memory comes from my time at their summer school.
And they used to do a thing for Carnival. The year you were summer school there, they did one with you. You were the golden team or something. And the
theme was gold.
The theme was gold. So there was you were the Golden Emperor. And there's Marlon, who was very keen on drag, as the Golden Empress. Campus lately old, and he had his brother, was it Marvin? stuff, really looked after him. And then you had someone as a golden rocket, which seemed like, an eccentric idea, but every royal family needs a rocket. Really was, sort of like dragged together, quite anarchic, not well drilled. It was wonderful, really, really wonderful. But I remember you all thought that you hadn't won. And so you were all packing up, because obviously they never won, and they thought, well, And someone said, why are you packing up? You've won. Which I thought was fantastic, so you won.
In my gold-painted bin bag with cardboard crown and sceptre, it was an amazing feeling, both parading and then actually winning when we were just doing it for the fun of it. This was during the last few years we were still living in Whitstable House, and while I was very unhappy to leave, I have since come to understand my parents' motives for moving away. What were some of the problems living in Whitstable House?
Heating. The heating was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. The problem with the heating was that it was kind of like municipal heating. It was switched on centrally. Yeah. So regardless of the temperature, it would get switched on in 1 month, which was meant to be the beginning of the cold season, and then switched off later on, which was meant to be the beginning of the warm season, regardless of what the temperatures were, regardless of how damp anything was. So that was really, really difficult. So eventually they did put in central heating, but when they went to put in the central heating, they had to throw us out of the flat for about a week or so while they took out the asbestos, because the place was full of asbestos.
And they made a real mess of it.
It went on for ages, and
it was weak, and we were up for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And when we came back, the place was just a wreck.
We had things like floods from upstairs, which would then short out all our electricals, and we'd report it, and it would take weeks to get somebody to come and first of all try and see what was going on upstairs, because obviously something untoward could be going on upstairs, and then fix what had been going on in our flat, which was kind of inundation. The tiles were all destroyed, the electrics were all destroyed.
We used to have quite a lot of power cuts in the building. And every time the power went off, we knew the generator would break down, and we knew that the water pump would be turned off, and they'd have to come and turn it back on. And so what would happen is the power cut, there'd be no water, and then we'd phone and say the pump's gone, can you send someone around? And it would take them a week to get any round.
And and the lifts. Sorry, forgot
the
lifts.
Were breaking down as well.
The lifts. I mean, each day your heart would be in your mouth as to whether or not you'd be able to get out or back in. And being pregnant and having to climb to the 12th floor, I don't think I ever bothered. Basically, if the lift was out, I wouldn't go out. So yeah, we had a terrible experience with Kensington and Chelsea, and then they moved on to what's called the TMO.
5 years.
TMO stands for Tenant Management Organisation. TMOs were brought in across the country in 1996 under the UK government's 1994 Housing Right to Manage regulations, with the goal of passing responsibility for running and maintenance of council housing and housing association homes over from the council to residents. Kensington and Chelsea TMO had the distinction of representing the largest number of council homes in the UK, with nearly 10,000 properties, and being the only TMO in the country to represent the entire housing stock of a single borough.
And we thought it was normal because we didn't know any better. And we knew it was kind of moving towards some kind of weird privatisation thing, semi-privatisation thing. So the council said either they would sell the flats to a management firm, or we had to accept the TMO. So of course everyone voted to accept the TMO. So this was trumpeted as a great rousing support for the tenants management organisation. So this was a hands-off organisation, although it was run by Kensington and Chelsea. It was meant to have tenants on it, but didn't really.
The KCTMO board was made up of 16 members, 4 who were council appointed, 4 independent, and 8 residents. That's a grand total of 8 people actually living in the council housing, representing nearly 10,000 homes.
And basically things went from bad to worse then in terms of repairs. The people at the end of the line, as I got older and more experienced, I realised they'd been given special training to put people off, to ignore them, to be to basically gaslight them. So you'd ring up knowing there's something wrong and they go, but is it really? Or, is it the same for everyone else? And all these kinds of things.
Have you checked with your neighbour?
Yeah.
TMO's attitude towards the tenants was they're lying scum if you're lying.
I mean, basically every time you rang up about anything, you had to have chapter and verse on it, because their attitude was, you're lying, you're liars. And that, there was no trust. There was absolutely no trust, first between tenants and Kensington and Chelsea, and then tenants and the TMO. It does sound like trivial things, but if your water's been cut off for 2 weeks over Christmas, it does make family life difficult. And again, it's like they didn't understand that we were families. There were families living in those flats. The council didn't seem to understand about family life and the dynamics of family life, and that families lived in those flats, and those flats weren't productive units creating easily monetized. They were people's homes. They treated the place, they treated the tenants like trash. But I know the tenant TMO was in charge prior to and at the time of the Grenfell Fire.
All right, you got me. This film is about Grenfell. The story I've told you so far was to provide you with some context, the aim being to give you a greater understanding of what family life is like living in a council home. And not just a council home, but more specifically, a council home in a tower block similar to and managed by the same people as Grenfell Tower. The Grenfell Tower Fire happened on the 14th of June 2017. But concerns around the quality of fire safety in the building had long worried residents. And at the same time, the potential for fire represented one of my mum's worst fears about living in the tower block next door.
And I think you asked me earlier about, one of the things that I didn't like about Whitstable House. And one of the things I didn't like was that kind of general idea that there could be a fire in Whitstable House at a lower level and we wouldn't be able to get past it. And there was no way out. Just terrified me. And of course, when you came along, kind of sent me into a spiral of hysteria.
And so all the stories you heard about, Grenfell and the way they were treated by the tenants management organisation, the way the tenants management organisation wouldn't do anything about the fireproofing, it was just like, God, I remember that. Awful. It just makes me so angry that, it was basically so much of it is a scam by Kensington and Chelsea to not have to pay for social housing, which they never wanted in the first place. They would be so happy if they didn't have to deal with North Kensington, And so they always treated their tenants like crap, especially when they having them off to. They were bad enough before the TMO, but once they get into the TMO were just awful.
Is this why you went on the protest march?
No, I went on the protest march because I hate the council. I went on the protest march because I wanted to make as much noise as possible. I wanted to show solidarity. I didn't want to get in anyone's way, but the least I could do was that there was going to be a mass demonstration outside the town hall. So I thought, that's the least I can do. So I rang around everyone, rang your father, rang you. You were actually down there to see if you could do anything to help. And get down to the town hall. So
I went from work and Karen came down, we went for this demonstration, which was just, sort of packed with people.
And there were hundreds and hundreds of journalists, and the journalists were interviewing each other. And I thought that was quite telling.
And it was reported on the news as, sort of violent and, sort of people were attacking the staff. No, they really weren't. Basically, the march was called that day because you had the whole thing about people angrily trying to talk to their, they were trying to talk to their councillors, and the councillors would lock themselves in.
One of the less serious councillors claimed that they'd been blockaded in the town hall, and that I think she claimed that the SAS had to come and free them, or some kind of paramilitary group had to come and free them, as opposed to somebody working in the town hall, opening up the door and letting the councillors out. It was just, insanity. absolute insanity to make a claim like that. But we were there, so we saw that there were no SAS or whoever it was she claimed.
Most of the people protesting there were from the area, were from Grenfell, were from Silchester Estate, were from all around that area. It wasn't like, you know, just, again, you're trying to play the sort of left-wing agitators who come in. It really wasn't. It really was local people. And you could tell, you know, the local people just didn't trust the journalists at all. And they wanted something from the council, and the council just hid and went out the back door.
At the same time, I had gone down to Bramley Road, just around the corner from Whitstable House in Grenfell, to see if there was any way I could help out. But seeing that there were more than enough volunteers already, and not wanting to get in anyone's way, I decided the better thing to do was to vent my anger with my parents up at the protest, so I headed up to join them.
And then suddenly it kind of went through the crowd, we're going to walk down to Grenfell. And I thought, this is brilliant, yeah, let's walk down to Grenfell, let's go down to Grenfell.
But it was quite an amazing atmosphere. And then basically we took over the road, all the way up from the town hall, all the way up Kensington Church Street, then through Notting Hill, then down Ladbroke Grove, and then to Grenfell.
Going down, you could see everything from the top of Ladbroke Grove. So we're going down the hill from Notting Hill, and then we got to this area at the bottom, and everyone's going, oh, that's the TMO office, this is the TMO office. So we stood there, very angry group of people. We were going to do something really, really harsh. We were going to call the TMO to account, and so we all stood there and booed. Massive boo going up from the crowd. Ah, boo!
And then we carried on to Grenfell.
And we came round the corner, and there it was. And it looked like something out of the apocalypse.
It's the first time I'd seen Grenfell after the fire, and it was just horrific.
It looked so awful. It looked like something out of a dystopian film.
But I'm not going to show you that. Chances are you've seen it already. This is partly out of respect for the families involved, but also partly because, to me, it feels voyeuristic. For me, Grenfell was that tower block I could see from my kitchen window, that I used to walk past every day on my way to school, that was always just there.
I mean, again, a building that you've been used to for years, there, just suddenly, it's just, you know, God knows how many people died in that.
And we stood there and we listened to some speeches, and we were angry, and we showed our solidarity, and we supported people who'd experienced this, and we showed our anger, and then we just all dispersed.
The march was a way for us to show solidarity with our former neighbours, and, as my mum puts it,
I think it's incredibly important to have people out on the streets being there as the backup to other people, the eyes and ears of the community.
And there was quite, a fantastic, invigorating feeling, taking over a street, people in cars hooting you, sort of like supporting you, just because this is a really horrific thing.
And it was crucial that we expressed this. And while some would say, why bother, nothing will change.
It's just like when we were fighting the electric camp, we used to get people saying, it's very sad, but, what can you do? It's an old building. What can you do? And we just said, we can fight.
Kensington and Chelsea Council have since disbanded the KCTMO, who now only exists as a legal entity to be represented in the ongoing Grenfell Tower inquiry. As a result of the fire, 72 people lost their lives. And, as of May 2020, many of the survivors still have no permanent homes. The ongoing coronavirus pandemic will only be confounding this problem. In many ways, the story of Grenfell actually mirrors that of the ongoing crisis. A failing by authorities to prevent and manage a foreseeable disaster by putting greed and personal interest ahead of public safety. But unlike the coronavirus, which as a natural disaster could not have been entirely prevented, the Grenfell fire could have been. Since the start of the COVID lockdown, everything has been in limbo. Both the inquiry and the now monthly march for Grenfell have been suspended until further notice. And the conversation around Grenfell has largely fallen silent. And I fear, with people's focus on the current crisis, there's a danger they are beginning to forget Grenfell. They shouldn't. The coronavirus crisis will not last forever, and for the survivors, the fight for justice goes on. For them, there are still many questions that need to be answered. And it is my hope, when this is all over, one day, there will be justice for Grenfell.